Hi, welcome to Chickens from the Hollow. I'm Lisa, and this is my farm, Hollyhock Hollow, hence the name of this channel, Chickens from the Hollow. So today I thought I would share with you how I made this nifty little worm farm that I use for my chickens. I give them lots of fresh worms here, and I made this probably 5 years ago, and I just redid it and changed up a couple of little things. But I got this old trash can from a neighbor several years ago, and I came up with the idea to make a worm farm that I could keep out here in my enclosed run, or it's not really enclosed, in my chicken run. And so it gets the moisture from, the little bit of rain that we get and snow, and it keeps everything kind of moist in there. And I just keep adding things to it to feed the worms. And then I can just pull out chunks of worms whenever I want to feed some treats to the girls. And they also kind of travel in and around this area. And so as the chickens like to dig, they can find worms that are in here. So stay tuned and I'll show you exactly how I made this. So I got this kooky trash can from a neighbor a few years back, and she had already drilled the holes in it and cut the bottom off it. I have no idea what she was actually using it for, but I kind of held on to it for a while, and then when I had this idea to make this worm bin, I said, hey, I could do something with that. So what I'm doing here is just cutting some wire to put underneath it, and I will tell you a little bit more about that once I get over there and start trying to install it. So here's me putting the wire down. So I had this little worm farm going for about 5 years, and I didn't have wire underneath it initially. And because there's food scraps and things in there, the mice I found kind of figured out a way just to burrow themselves up in there. And in the winter, when I have it insulated, they really enjoyed being up in there. So I put just hardware cloth across the bottom this year, and hopefully that'll stop those pesky little mice from getting in there. So the first thing I did is just put some old hay. You could use straw or grass clippings or whatever, just to kind of give it some cushion at the bottom. And then I wet that down really well. And that also kind of serves as a little bit of bedding for the worms because they stay in here all year. I don't take these inside or anything. And we have a pretty harsh winter some years. So later on this year, I'll show you how I insulate this. And my worms have made it through every year. So now I'm adding just some paper shreds, just junk mail paper, and wetting that down. I use that a lot of times for some extra bedding, and I have a worm farm that's inside my little heated greenhouse, so they can stay in there year round. And so I just use the shredded paper, and they seem to be okay with it. I know a lot of people like to use cardboard, but the paper works for me pretty well, and it's something I have on hand. So here I'm just dumping in some leftover tulip bulbs and some scraps from, I'm a flower farmer, so I just have been harvesting tulips, and so just some greenery. And then this is the compost bin from the kitchen. It's got vegetable scraps and some eggshells and a little bit of citrus. I try not to put too much of that in there, but they do kind of try to hide inside those little half orange shells or peels that I put in there. So I throw in a few. It's not always ideal, I know, but it's just easier for me to dump all of the things in one compost bucket. So wet everything down really well. You want your bedding to be pretty moist, and you'll see some eggshells in there as well. I usually crunch those up just a little bit, or sometimes I grind them even, but I just don't have time to really pay attention to that kind of detail. So they're sometimes just whole eggshells. And then here are the worms that I pulled out of my inside worm bin. I just took a big couple of scoops of those with some worm castings and just got this worm farm ready to go. So put those in, and then I just used some shredded up paper bag that I use kind of on the top just to keep things kind of moist, and wet that down again and get that all nice and soaked. You don't want it too soaked, but luckily there's no bottom on this, so the excess water will drain out. And then here's the magic lid. This is the bottom of the trash can that my neighbor had cut off, and it fits perfectly inside there, and it seals it from any kind of critters getting in there, and yet the water can go in, and the snow and the rain. They can kind of just keep it moist throughout the winter. So anyway, easy worm farm for your chickens. Hope you enjoyed.